Hello, my dear students. I hope you're all doing well. I hope you're all staying safe. And I hope everyone in your family and everyone you love and hold dear are safe and healthy and hearty. Today, students, we learn about an extremely important concept, which is the right to approach the court to obtain remedies for the enforcement of fundamental rights. Today, we learn about the article that makes sure that part 3 and fundamental rights are not toothless, and that if they are violated, you have a right to make sure that the violation stops. Today we are going to learn about a concept which Dr. Ambedkar called as the heart and soul of the constitution. Today we will learn about article 32 and the remedies for enforcement of part 3. How can you make sure that if your rights are violated, that violation will not continue, and for whatever violation has happened, you will get some kind of compensation or benefits, or some kind of corrective measures will be taken. How is that ensured? That is ensured through article 32. Article 32 clause 1 guarantees the right to move the Supreme Court in appropriate proceedings. What are appropriate proceedings? There was a lack of clarity. Initially in the 1950s, the Supreme Court said that any proceeding, any remedies that are available through Article 32(2), any remedies that may be appropriate in Article 32(2) is an appropriate proceeding under 32(1). But you must understand that this definition has undergone a change because the scope of 32 has undergone a change. Any proceeding appropriate under 32(2) is what the court said in the 50s, but then in the 50s we didn't have the concept of public interest litigation. Public interest litigation has allowed any public spirited citizen to see that somewhere in the society someone's fundamental right, the poorest of poor, their fundamental rights are being violated. Therefore even I can go saying that their fundamental rights have been violated. A public spirited citizen can go. Therefore the definition of proceedings under 32(2) has undergone a change. Therefore 32(1) appropriate proceedings also has become much wider. There's a concept known as epistolary jurisdiction. Epistolary jurisdiction refers to a practice where people write letters to the Supreme Court or write letters to judges personally, judges in the Supreme Court. And these letters are converted to writ petitions. One example is Sheila Barsay versus Union of India, a 1988 case where the petitioner wrote a letter to the Supreme Court, and that was converted into a writ petition. This is also an appropriate proceeding. Furthermore, usually at the Supreme Court, at the High Court levels, there is a general rule that facts will not be appreciated. Facts will not be appreciated. But even that rule has been watered down. To gather facts, we need to have a process for evidence collection. At the Supreme Court level, there is no evidence collection. So what do you do in a writ petition? The Supreme Court has appointed commissions. Commissions led by former judges, commissions led by advocates, and the Supreme Court has tried to ensure that even facts are appreciated. So there is a very wide scope for appropriate proceeding. Basically, we may say that anything that the Supreme Court is convinced about becomes an appropriate proceeding. Anything that the Supreme Court believes is applicable and is of public importance becomes an appropriate proceeding. Now, Article 32(2) says that the Supreme Court can issue directions, it can give out orders, and it can issue writs, including writs in the nature of, that is, Supreme Court can issue directions, it can issue orders, it can issue writs, and these writs include writs that are in the nature of, there are 5 writs, and these 5 writs are known as prerogative writs. So the 5 writs that the Supreme Court is allowed to, or writs in the nature of that the Supreme Court is allowed to issue, are habeas corpus, mandamus, certiorari, quo warranto, and prohibition. So, habeas corpus, mandamus, certiorari, quo warranto, and prohibition. These are the 5 writs. What do these 5 writs include? What do these 5 writs include? The scope of these writs. The scope of the writs are simple. Let us begin with habeas corpus. Habeas corpus means produce the body. In England, habeas corpus is known as the bulwark of liberties, which means that just like the Article 32 is the heart and soul of our constitution, the heart and soul, or the most important principle of the British constitutional law, is the writ of habeas corpus. This writ is not issued to punish anybody. This writ is issued to release those people who have been illegally detained, people who should not be confined to their homes, people who should not be sitting in jails. If they are sitting in jails, if their movement has been restricted, then habeas corpus. And again, this doesn't necessarily have to be in the context of a house or a jail. There are cases where women are not allowed to leave their houses because they decide they've fallen in love with some other man. There are men who are not allowed to leave their houses because they want to marry someone outside their caste. In such cases also, a writ for habeas corpus can be issued. Please remember this. In A.K. Gopalan versus State of Madras, 1950, the Supreme Court clarified this. The Supreme Court said that if any kind of detention is illegal, any kind of detention, may it be by the government, may it be by a non-governmental authority, may it be by an individual. If the detention is illegal, then writ of habeas corpus can be issued. So habeas corpus protects your right to life and personal liberty under Article 21 mainly. Please remember. Secondly, mandamus. Mandamus means to command, to mandate, to provide a mandatory order. This is when the court asks someone to act legally. They are legally bound to do something. They are not doing it. The court asks them to do it. That is called mandamus. Or they are legally not allowed to do something. They legally have to stop themselves from doing something, but they are continuing with it. That time mandamus is issued. To act or to abstain from acting in an illegal manner. To act or to abstain from acting in an illegal manner, the writ of mandamus is issued. This writ can again come from the Supreme Court or the High Court, and it is issued to all bodies that lie before it, lie below it. So it can go to lower courts, it can go to a corporation, a public corporation like LIC, Life Insurance Corporation. It can go to them. It can go to an administrative tribunal or a land tribunal or such a tribunal of any such nature, or it can go to any quasi-judicial authority. So the scope of this writ is very wide. It can go to a lower court, it can go to a quasi-judicial body, it can go to an administrative body, and it can also go to a corporation. In the case of S.P. Gupta versus Union of India, also known as the first judge's case, the question was asked, can mandamus be issued to the president with regard to appointment of judges or to increase the number of judges? Can the Supreme Court issue a writ to the president saying appoint judges? Can that be done? Was the question asked. And all the judges except one judge said that no, we cannot issue a writ of mandamus to the president. However, this position changed in the second judge's case. In Supreme Court, Advocate on Records Associations, Kaura. Supreme Court, Advocate on Records Association versus Union of India. Second judge's case from 1993. Supreme Court reversed its decision in the first judge's case with regard to this one point. They said if the number of judges need to be increased, then the number of judges need to be increased, and we can issue an order of mandamus to the president asking for such increase in the numbers. This is something that the Supreme Court permitted issuing a writ of mandamus, but it's very rare that you see the Supreme Court issuing it. See, the president is the head of the executive, and the Supreme Court is the head of the judiciary. They don't usually conflict with each other in the interest of separation of powers. They try to avoid all kinds of conflict. We can issue a mandamus, but we will not. This is the kind of attitude that the Supreme Court usually is seen adopting. Yes, there is a need for increase in judges, but we judges will work harder till you increase the judges. We will not, but you see the way we are working hard and you understand how much you need to do and how we are working hard, but that should be an inspiration for you to work hard. This is the kind of attitude that the Supreme Court and the High Court try. This is the kind of example that they try and set. Next writ is quo warranto. Basically means by what warrant, by whose warrant, by whose authority. In a situation where a public officer gives out a decision which he has no power to give. A public officer is occupying a chair that he does not have the authority, or that she does not have the authority to occupy. In that case, quo warranto. By what authority are you sitting in that position is the question that the court is asking. Show your authority, and if you can't show, then vacate that seat. That is what quo warranto is trying to establish. However, this is only applicable with regard to public offices. In University of Mysore versus Govinda Rao, a case from 1965, the Supreme Court clarified that first you need to, if you are asking for a quo warranto writ, then you need to establish that the office, the said office, the concerned office is actually a public office. First you prove that this is public office, then we will see whether quo warranto can be issued or not. This was said in University of Mysore versus Govinda Rao. Next we come to certiorari. What does certiorari say? It is an order of a higher judicial body to a lower body. Initially people used to say to a lower judicial body, but now you should understand that tribunals are there, income tax officers are there, so many bodies that are performing judiciary like functions. They are not courts, but they are performing a role of a court, quasi judicial functions. Therefore the scope of certiorari has expanded. So an order of a higher court, in the case of, let us say, the Supreme Court. The Supreme Court can issue this to all high courts that come below it. It can issue it to tribunals. It can also issue it to income tax officers and such other executive officers who are taking decisions that affect people's rights. And once the certiorari writ is issued, what happens? It is basically a writ where you are asking for orders, where you are asking for records to be summoned. Hey you, lower court, please give me all the records in this concerned case. That is basically what certiorari is trying to convey. When is this writ issued? It is issued most commonly in the following circumstances. Number one, when the said body, the said lower court or the said lower authority does not have jurisdiction. Lack of jurisdiction. Secondly, excess of jurisdiction. It has the ability to do A, B, C, D, but it is also doing E, F, G, H. In the first case, it does not have the power to do A, B, C, D also. In the second case, it has power to do some things, but does not have power to do some other things, but it is doing it anyway. Excess of jurisdiction. So number one, in case of lack of jurisdiction, certiorari is issued. In case of excess of jurisdiction, also certiorari is issued. Abuse of power. You have the power to do something and you're doing it only because you don't like a particular person or like a particular body. Abuse of jurisdiction. Then prima facie error in the application of the law. The law says that you have to go in such a manner. You are going in that manner only. However, you forgot to read the next part, which says this applies only to certain situations and you're applying it to all situations. You have to go straight, but you have to go straight only between, let's say, 6 o'clock to 7 o'clock in the morning. And instead, all to entire 24 hours, this law is being applied. Then that becomes a huge problem. So prima facie error in the application of the law. That time also certiorari can be issued. And finally, violation of the principles of natural justice. What are the principles of natural justice? There are three. Number one is audi alteram partem, which means listen to both the sides. So if a judgment is given, before you listen to all the parties involved, then there is a violation of principles of natural justice. You can claim a writ of certiorari. So seen in the case of Dr. Beena Pani, State of Odisha versus Dr. Beena Pani. It was alleged that Dr. Beena Pani has lied about her age, about her birthday, and therefore she has extended service by nearly 3 years. So she was actually, when she should have been 60 years old on paper, it was only saying that she was 57. So Odisha decided that okay, we will not give her any punishment for lying, but we will force her into retirement. Dr. Binapani went to court, and yeah, the Supreme Court agreed. You did not even listen to her. You did not give her a chance to establish that she is actually 60. You have taken unilateral decision that she is 60. You did not give her a chance to prove that she is 57 and not 60. You did not listen to her. Audi alteram partem. Listen to both sides. So if you have not been heard, if the authority has not given you a chance to speak, then you can go to court asking for certiorari. Second one is nemo debet in causa sua. What does this mean? It means no man shall be a judge in his own case. No person is allowed to decide. So there is a matter in which I have an interest. There is a matter in which there's a company. I'm a judge. There's a company in which I have shares. That company's case comes before me. If the company wins the case, share prices will go up. I'm advantaged. I cannot sit as a judge in my own case. Nemo debet judex in causa sua. No man shall judge his own case. Seen in the case of A.K. Kraipak, a very famous case. A.K. Kraipak was a certain gentleman who was working in the state forest services, and then the Indian Forest Service was created. So from every state, some people were getting elevated from state forest service to Indian Forest Service. Mr. Kraipak was representing a group of people who were negatively affected. So Mr. Kraipak was a state service member who was representing other state service members. He said that on the interview panel, there was a certain gentleman who was sitting. So there was a Mr. X who was sitting on the interview panel. He was also appearing as a candidate. So Mr. X is sitting as along with three others. He is sitting as interview panel. He rejects everyone, and then sometime later he goes and sits as as a candidate in front of his other three people, and he gets selected. So A.K. Kraipak, who was representing a group of state forest service officers, approached the court saying this is a clear violation of principles of natural justice. He is sitting as a judge in his own case. This is clear case of bias. So this is also a case where certiorari was demanded, and these similar cases certiorari writ can be asked for. Finally, we come to the writ of prohibition. Prohibition, common, it means to stop. In common man's language, it is called as stay order. A stay order is also known as, is actually technically known as prohibition. It is again issued to lower bodies that are performing judicial functions. So it can be courts, it can also be individual authorities like income tax officer or land revenue officer, and so on and so forth. You issue a writ of prohibition so that abuse is prevented. You prevent an abuse when there is absence of power, when there is excess use of power, to make sure that there is no abuse. That is the main aim of prohibition, also known as commonly stay order. This is the scope of the writ. In general, what all falls within the ambit of Article 32? What are some rules that you need to keep in mind? These are all judicially evolved. Number one is the general rule is that you can only approach the Supreme Court for a violation of a fundamental right, and this lies against the state. So the fundamental rights are guaranteed by the state, therefore violation is also by the state, and therefore you usually proceed against a state. And you know what the definition of state is. We've learned that in Article 12. However, Article 17, Article 23, and Article 24. 17 is untouchability, 23 and 24 rights against exploitation. These are available against individuals, private individuals also. So general rule is available against state. Smaller 17, 23, 24 available against private individuals, but scope has expanded. There have been cases where right to life it is said that right to life can be violated by private individuals also. For example, in the case of MC Mehta versus Kamal Nath. Kamal Nath was former Union Cabinet Minister, former Chief Minister of Madhya Pradesh. MC Mehta versus Kamal Nath was a public interest litigation regarding the environment. So there were, and the Supreme Court admitted it. Mr. Kamal Nath is an individual, and a violation of right to clean environment under right to life, Article 21, was maintainable. It was allowed against a private individual. Another case is Bodhisattva Gautam versus Shubhra Chakravarti. It was a case where the lady alleged that rape was committed upon her. The man said that no such thing happened. It was the relationship was consensual. Upon examination, the court found out that the man had promised to marry the woman, but he already had another wife, so he couldn't marry her. And any kind of consent that was given was only given because she did not know that he can't marry her, that he's already married, and therefore it was fraud. So the consent was not true at all. It was not pure consent at all. The consent was given based on misrepresentation, and therefore it was not consent at all. Therefore, she was raped. That is what the court said. While saying so, the court also said that whenever such things are committed upon women, their right to life is violated. So, whenever a woman is a victim of any kind of assault, her right to life is violated. A similar line of reasoning was seen in Vichaka versus State of Rajasthan. Supreme Court said that right to life is violated when a woman is sexually harassed at workplace. Her right to equality, 14, 15, 16, are all violated when a woman is sexually harassed at her workplace. Sexual harassment is a crime. It's done by an individual or a group of individuals. It's not done by the state. But when the state is not able to prevent that, when the state is not able to control that, then there is a violation. And apart from the state, it is also these individuals against whom such accusations can be made. So ideally, it is the Article 32 relief is only available against the state, but there are examples, there are exceptions where it is also available against individuals. Res judicata, does that apply? What is res judicata? Simple. Res judicata is a principle which says if one case has already been tried and decided, then you cannot bring the same facts again. In a land dispute, if the court gives a verdict, you cannot come with the same land dispute again. That's called res judicata. So does res judicata apply for Article 32? Supreme Court said yes. In fact, it's not just Article 32. If I go to a Supreme Court saying my fundamental right is violated, and they decide that it is violated or that it is not violated, I cannot go to the Supreme Court again. But if I go to the High Court saying my fundamental right is violated, I cannot go to the Supreme Court under Article 32. If I can go on appeal. If there is a question of law, the High Court will give me a certificate. If not, I can come under special leave, SLP 136. But I cannot come under 32. So if my fundamental right, a question relating to my fundamental right is decided by the High Court under Article 226, then I can only appeal to the Supreme Court. I cannot come directly as an original case under Article 32. Supreme Court is clear. Secondly, if the Supreme Court has decided a certain matter, same facts cannot come up before the court again. So res judicata, the principle that stops you from going again and again to the court for the same facts, is applicable in the case of Article 32. This is so that the burden is reduced. Thirdly, PIL. PIL is an interesting concept. Initially, the understanding was if your fundamental rights are violated, or if your fundamental rights may be violated, the government or some body is behaving in a certain manner whereby if this behavior continues for the next 5 or 6 more days, my rights will be violated. Or they have behaved in a manner whereby my rights are already violated. So future violation as well as past violation, both you can go to court. But the violation needs to affect you. But Justice Krishna Iyer, Justice P.N. Bhagwati, they were called as the revolutionaries insofar as locus standi and PIL is concerned. They started allowing people whose rights are not directly affected, but whose rights are also whose rights are not affected, but who are representing people whose rights are affected. Justice D.Y. Chandrachud, Dr. Justice Dhananjay Chandrachud, recently, in a convocation ceremony conducted at the Gujarat National Law University, made a very appropriate, deep and poignant statement. He said that it takes a lot of courage to stand up for those people who cannot stand up for themselves. He said that people who are defending the rights of those who don't even know that they have rights or who are not having the ability to defend their rights, they are doing a very brave and noble job. This was said by Dr. Justice Chandrachud. And this is the principle that the Supreme Court has adopted with regard to PILs. So many cases on a daily basis, people are going to court saying that the fundamental rights have been violated. The Supreme Court is giving and granting them justice. It was a small step taken in one small case a long time ago. But look at how wide impact is there now. Not every woman in Kerala could go to the court saying, I want to go to Sabrimala. Not every woman could say that, raise their voice against the triple talaq. Not every individual has the ability to raise their voice against the Citizenship Amendment Act. And yet, they will not go unheard, because if even one person can go to court, the court will listen. That is the kind of impact that PILs have had. So from a point where your rights need to be affected, we've reached a point where anyone's right can be affected, but you only need to prove that you're a genuine person. You cannot be an NGO where you will get money from someone if you go and fight case for them. That is not public spirit. That is private interest litigation. Court has come down hard on that. Recently, a 50-year-old man went to court saying it is against the right to equality, that men are allowed to marry only at 21, but women are allowed to marry at 18. So men, women should be treated equally, should be allowed to marry at 18. Court came down very hard. Court came down very hard on them. Court said that let an 18-year-old girl or a 21-year-old man come. Why are you coming? The court asked him to pay a fine. Serious costs were applied. Finally, can you issue writs against courts? This is again something that we have learned in our earlier constitutional law lectures. Can a writ lie against a court? No. Not when it is performing a judicial function. Courts cannot violate your fundamental rights when they are doing judicial functions. We are aware of this case that I am going to mention now. Naresh Sridhar Mirajkar versus State of Maharashtra, 1967. Supreme Court was very clear. Supreme Court said that your rights can be violated by a court when it is performing administrative function. When it's performing judicial function, you have to go on appeal. And if all the appeals are over, then you should trust the court's verdict. The court has applied judicial mind. People who know the law and have experience dealing with the law for many, many years have decided your case. Just because you think they were wrong doesn't mean they're wrong. So many judges cannot be wrong after so many levels. What does Article 32 Clause 3 says? It says that the powers under Article 32 can be conferred upon any body with local jurisdiction. So you can create a special special court to issue writs. In America, even local courts can issue writs, by the way. In India also you can, but such power has not been granted. There is no history of such power being granted. Even a district court can grant writs if such a law is made. Appropriate Parliament confers such appropriate powers, but it has never happened as far as I know. As far as my knowledge takes me, 32(3) has not been exercised in India yet. Can we exercise it? Yes. One common confusion is, can the power of Article 32 be given to Article 226 can the power under Article 32 be given to a High Court? Why should you give that? A High Court has much wider power. Everything that is contained in Article 32 is present with the High Court already. And it has more. Fundamental rights under Article 32 is restricted. Under Article 32 is restricted to fundamental rights. But Article 226 covers fundamental rights as well as constitutional rights. So High Court powers are significantly wider. Then why will you restrict its powers? So this usually talks about bodies that can't ordinarily issue writs, like district courts or some tribunals. It has never been done, and in all likelihood it will not be done. Finally, Article 32 Clause 4 says that fundamental rights may be suspended in accordance with the provisions of the Constitution. Now, provisions of the Constitution, Article 359 says that fundamental rights may be suspended during an emergency. 359. Please read Article 359. The same Article 359 also says that all fundamental rights except rights under Article 20 and Article 21. So all fundamental rights except Article 20, Article 21 may be suspended, which means your right to approach the Supreme Court also may be suspended, except for a writ of habeas corpus. Why? Habeas corpus is a protection available with regard to Article 20 and Article 21, protection of life and personal liberty. So for the purpose of habeas corpus, you can go to the Supreme Court. However, I have a difference of opinion. I believe that an individual may not be able to, or a group may not be able to go to court and ask for rights, but the court still has the power to take suo motu cognizance. If something wrong is happening in the society, the Supreme Court or the High Courts can on their own, but particularly in the case of Article 32, the Supreme Court can on their own take a decision that they will investigate or they will look into this matter and give the rights that the people deserve. That's what I believe. So an individual may not be able to go to court during an emergency, but the court can still do its role in the society. That is what I believe. Again, I hope this question is, there is no need for it, for this question to be answered, because to answer this question, we will need to have an emergency situation. And in a democracy, an emergency is never good. So let us hope that this question is one of the unanswered questions, because this question will only need to be answered in an emergency, and hopefully we never have to see emergency again. We as a country go forward and do well always. Now let us compare Article 32 and Article 226. I have already mentioned High Court have a much wider power than Supreme Court. So what do you do? Where do you go first? Supreme Court has said that just because you can go to the High Court, it doesn't mean you can't come to us. Concurrent jurisdiction. If there is a matter that the Supreme Court can decide, if there is a matter that the High Court can decide, there is no need for you to go to High Court first. Ramesh Thapar versus State of Madras, 1950. Yes, High Court jurisdiction under 226, Supreme Court jurisdiction under 32. They are concurrent. They go hand in hand. They are on the same level. But just because you don't go to the High Court first, it doesn't mean that you're wrong. However, Supreme Court is the highest court of the land. All appeals from every part of the country is coming to us. We have a lot of load. So please go to the High Court first. They can also give you relief. That's what the court is saying. High Court also can give you relief. If your rights are affected in Karnataka, go to Karnataka High Court. Yes, you can come to Supreme Court. We can ask the Karnataka government to make sure that your rights are taken care of. But so can the Karnataka High Court. Karnataka High Court can ask the Karnataka government. If it's affecting in Kerala, then Kerala government can do. If it is in Uttar Pradesh High Court at Allahabad can take care of it. And then why don't come to us? But if you come to us, we will not say that just because you have not gone to High Court, we will throw you out. No. Exhaust all alternative remedies, but just because alternative is available, we will not throw you out. But we recommend strongly that you finish off all the other alternatives. Again, High Courts have much wider power. High Courts have the ability to issue writs in the nature of or any other orders, even when constitutional rights. So Article 300A, right to property. Article 300 capital A, right to property, not a fundamental right. It is a constitutional right. Can you go to the Supreme Court? No. Ideally not. Can you go to the High Court? Yes, you can. You can go to the High Court, but not the Supreme Court. Of course, Supreme Court, at the end of the day, the Supreme Court has wider powers. If the judges believe that they need to listen to the matter, they will listen and no one can stop them. But again, Supreme Court judges are there because they're senior, they know the law. They will also apply their sound judicial mind and only then take such a decision. Otherwise, right to property related cases, constitutional right cases will go to the High Court first. Finally, what judicial review? I mean, amongst all this, you must have understood that the power of judicial review exists. We've spoken about this. What is judicial review? We've learnt about this during separation of powers. Judicial review is a process whereby the validity of something is tested against the constitution. We need to check whether something is unconstitutional. See, the Supreme Court does not say whether something is constitutional. It only says something is unconstitutional. Why? There is an assumption that every decision that is taken is constitutional. Presumption of constitutionality. Let us take the example of CAA, Citizenship Amendment Act. It has been challenged in the Supreme Court. Does that mean the act is already invalid? No. The act continues. The act will continue to operate. till the day when the Supreme Court says that it is unconstitutional. If Supreme Court says that it is not unconstitutional, CAA is valid. If the court says so, then no problem. Then it will continue. Every act is assumed to be a constitutional act unless declared as unconstitutional. Every act is a valid act unless expressly specifically informed as unconstitutional. Please remember that. Judicial review again is a concept that we have studied earlier. Please fall back on your knowledge, prior knowledge, and I hope you keep yourselves updated and we will take this forward. Thank you so much.